All right, folks, welcome to our introduction about our new topic we're going to study, and that is the Phoenicians. All right, so without further ado, let's get going. So, the first thing, naturally, we want to know who were they? Who were the Phoenicians? Now, I'm sure a lot of us have probably never heard of them before. All right, they are a people that came from the eastern shore of the Mediterranean Sea in what is now Lebanon. All right, so they were a Middle Eastern people, again from the modern country of Lebanon now. They were different than a lot of the other cultures that lived around them. All right, they were completely surrounded by these large empires, but they lived in things known as city states. Now, what a city state is, all right, and you may remember what it is from when we talked about Mesopotamia. City states are independent cities. All right. So they are cities that operate as essentially their own country. All right. It's not like Danvers, where Danvers is a part of Massachusetts, which is a part of the United States. It would be like if Danvers was its own country with its own military, its own government. It makes all its decisions on its own. It trades with other places all on its own without having to listen to a larger force. All right, that's what was like in Phoenicia. All right, their major cities were, if you look at this map, you might be able to see Tyre and Sidon. Those are the two major cities, major city states that made up this region that historians call Phoenicia. All right, and they originally settled this area around 4000 BCE. So you think that's 6,000 years ago? That's a long time ago. It's 1500 years before the pyramids of Egypt were built. So we're talking about a really, really long time ago, and an old people that lived there for thousands of years afterwards too. All right, but we'll get to their history in a second. They were different. All right, they were different from, like I said, a lot of the people that lived around them. All right, they never built this large unified empire that happened in other parts of the world. All right, even when we talked about city states with Mesopotamia, the people in Mesopotamia eventually united under the Sumerians and the Assyrians and all of that. And in Egypt, the same thing happened. There was a unification. All right, but in Phoenicia, that never really happened. They stayed independent city states, and they didn't have this large unified empire. All right. For the most part, they were merchants who made their fortunes with trading, right? They weren't in a river valley. They didn't have like they couldn't like make their own surplus of food like you could in the Fertile Crescent or in the Nile River Valley. So they made all of their fortune by trading with all these people that were around them, like the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Hittites, the Egyptians, later on the Persians. So they were all that. So that's how they did it. They were kind of the middlemen of the ancient world. Like anything that came and went from the Mediterranean into the Fertile Crescent had to go through these Phoenician city states. All right, and that made them super wealthy. All right, eventually, all right, and this also sets them apart. They traveled a lot. They eventually set up trade ports all over the Mediterranean Sea. All right, and we'll get to that in a minute. This is their timeline of how that happened. All right, they were colonizers. All right, and what colonization is, what colonizers are, they're people that travel from like a homeland, like Phoenicia, and they go to distant lands and set up like trading posts or trade ports and live there essentially as merchants. Okay, think like the 13 colonies in the American Revolution. We all like this part of the world. All right, was colonized by the British the same way the Phoenicians colonized the Mediterranean. All right? They sent out ships, they landed in all these places along the Mediterranean, and they set up trade ports. All right? Just like the British did. Here's a timeline of how that happened. All right? So it starts in 1250 BC. Their independent city-states are conquered, all right, by what people think are the Israelites, came from the south of them, all right, and conquered their city-states, forcing them to flee to an extent. And so what that led to was 50 years later, this wave of colonization goes across the Mediterranean, where they set up all these trade ports in all sorts of places, like in Tangier, Morocco, and Cadiz in Spain. Like all these like cities that still exist were founded by the Phoenicians in this first wave of colonization. The Greek Isles, all right, a lot of the islands in the Aegean Sea were settled by the Phoenicians. Okay. In 1100 BC, the city-states kind of have this renaissance almost, where they're still under rule by the Israelites, but they still have somewhat autonomy to do all the trade that they normally do, and this is where they start to reach their height. This is where a lot of their contributions to the ancient world come from, is during this time period. And later on, as we get further into the future, in 800 BC, there's a second wave of colonization. All right, and this is where they have the founding of Carthage, which is a settlement on a peninsula in Tunisia. All right, and they start settling in Sicily, which is that big island that looks like it's getting kicked by Italy. They set up colonies there, and so what that does is it sets them up to dominate trade in the Mediterranean. They have like two large footholds in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, which allows them to control all of the western half and all of the eastern half at the same time. Here's what a map of that looks like. All right, so here's Carthage and Sicily. So the first wave of colonization spreads like mainly stays mainly in the eastern half, and then the second wave is when they go and they find all these other places. All right, you can see they settle southern Spain, northern Africa. Here's Carthage, which becomes their major hub, and then Sicily here. So as you can see, if they're controlling Sicily and Carthage at the same time, there's not a lot of room for people to go without passing through. All right, so you have to go through a Phoenician port in order to get from one end to the other. All right. It's also, people thought they may have gone all the way around the Mediterranean, all the way around into the Atlantic Ocean, all the way up to Great Britain as well, and to the French coast. So these people were well-traveled, very well-traveled. And that's to do with some of their contributions as well. All right, trade. They created, one of the reasons why they could travel so well was they created a ship known as the trireme. All right, and the trireme is such an innovative ship, it becomes the standard for the ships in the ancient world. The Greeks immediately adapt the trireme to their army. All right, and we'll see. All right, when we talk about the downfall of the Phoenicians, the Romans actually adopt the trireme and improve on it, and that ends up being the downfall of them. All right, so this ship allowed them to travel all over the Mediterranean. The colonies they set up also, it spread their influence far and wide. So, a lot of the influence of these other cultures we studied, like in India and Mesopotamia and Egypt, they were kind of contained for the most part to the area, but the Phoenicians, they went all over the Mediterranean. So whatever they did, those ideas and that impact spread to all these different places. The arts, they were known a lot for the arts too. There are two main things, all right, according to the research I've seen. One is they're very well known for creating this rare purple dye from the murex snail. All right, yes, they essentially squeeze a snail in this purple dye. All right, and this dye was so rare, and it took thousands of snails just to create a little bit of the dye, that purple became like a symbol of royalty and a symbol of wealth in the ancient world. All right, especially in Rome. Rome was known forever as, like purple was known forever in Rome as this royal color. And that is all to do with this purple dye that only existed on that eastern Mediterranean shore where the Phoenician city-states were. Also, another thing they were thought to have done is invent glass and perfected the art of glass blowing. All right. So they created all these things that were very sought after by other people in the ancient world. And then the alphabet. I'm not going to talk too much about this because Mr. Dunleavy will handle this in the next lesson you will see. But the alphabet they had, it was a little different than ours. It contained 22 consonants but no vowels. All right. The vowels were just sounds that were like empty sounds that filled in the gaps between the consonants. All right. Later on, the alphabet goes to be adapted by the Greeks and later the Romans. And then it morphs into the alphabet we know it as today. But again, you'll see more on that tomorrow. And here's how it all comes to an end. Now, the Phoenician city-states are conquered for good by Alexander the Great, who conquered everyone. There's no shame in that. And the operations of the Phoenicians essentially moved to Carthage at that time. All right, but then a couple hundred years later on, Rome conquers Carthage in a series of wars. There were three of them. They're known as the Punic Wars. All right, and we'll talk more about that a little later, but it ends with the city of Carthage, which you see here, all right, in this picture with this it's well-known circular harbor, the city of Carthage gets completely leveled. There's not a trace of Carthaginian architecture left because the Romans destroyed all of it and then built their own city on top of it. All right, it's very close to the city of Tunis in the modern-day country of Tunisia. All right. So, folks, that is all you need to know about the Phoenicians. What you're going to do now is you're going to go back to the choice board. You're going to fill out that Google form that's all about this presentation, and then you will submit that. All right. Please watch this again, and feel free to go back and go forward in this as much as you need in order to get the information you may or may not have missed. All right. Watch this as many times as you need. Thank you all for paying attention. This has been Mr. Foz on the Phoenicians.